For years, my brother was the untouchable golden child, but after squandering grandma's money, he now faces a lawsuit and a lifetime of debt payments. My parents felt my brother Jason could do no wrong, but my work was unsatisfactory. Mom replied, "Oh, Jason needs his social time." But with drama club, she guilt-tripped me about missing family dinners. Jason was caught cheating on 3 high school exams. Dad called the principal to explain that being so proficient and overwhelmed caused stress. My B+ in chemistry indicated I needed help, so they hired a tutor. Double standard was absurd. Jason crashed his car drunk at 19. After he learned his lesson and needed reliable transportation, our parents covered it up and bought him a new truck. After scraping the garage door, they had me pay for repairs using part-time employment money because responsibility builds character. They said Jason quit college after 2 semesters to discover himself and explore options. They transformed the garage into a recording studio when Jason wanted to be a musician but never learned or wrote songs. When I asked student loan assistants, they said, "We need to be smart with money, and you need to learn independence." Jason stole from Mom's purse, making her assume she forgot to spend it. When her jewelry vanished, she feared she misplaced it. When his garage tools disappeared, Dad thought he lent them. They assumed I was jealous and trying to cause issues when I saw the tendency. Jason started a business with $15,000 of their retirement funds that failed in 3 months. They said, "At least he tried. Failure teaches best." Their response to my $750 professional certification course request was, "Maybe next year when finances are better." Grandma Helen's sickness was the issue. Her grandkids would receive her $150,000 funds and full-time care. Jason became her devoted grandchild, visiting her every day and volunteering to manage her assets while everyone else was occupied. My parents praised his maturity and caring leadership. Grandma's money vanished in 3 months. Jason claimed medical and domestic expenses without receipts. He planned to buy her generic food and pocket the rest, claiming he bought organic. Due to heavy expenditures, he persuaded her to sign a power of attorney. Jason was such a nice grandson that my parents never questioned anything. Who dares disagree? Grandma died 6 months later, leaving nothing when the will was read. Jason wasted everything but $8,000. The lawyer detected irregular transactions, but Jason had power of attorney, so it was legal. My parents said we should be grateful he spent it on Grandma's care. I was interrupted by my banker relative Nina. She observed where the money went but wasn't supposed to talk. Jason moved it to accounts and a gaming app. $150,000 was wasted in 6 months as Grandma ate generic bread and watched her stories in a cold house because Jason thought the heating expense was too expensive. Everything was screenshotted by Nina. Gaming site received Jason's account transactions promptly. Time and date match exactly. Jason's legal power left her unsure what to do after months of documentation. I planned the family reunion because I had important Grandma's estate news. He replied, "If this was about money, then I was being disgusting and disrespecting Grandma's memory." I distributed around printed screenshots after my parents chastised me before speaking. Jason's personal account got $45,000 on January 10th. The same $45,000 traveled to Bet King Casino 3 hours later. January 25th. $25,000 more. Another $35,000, February 3rd. Every transfer is tracked. Jason said the documents were private financial data, but everyone saw them. Jason was asked by my Uncle David, a cop, why Grandma's money was going to online gambling while she died. Jason said Grandma urged him to invest for the family. He invested via gambling. Room explode. Uncle David got up from his chair and crossed the room in 3 steps, staring Jason in the face with his cop posture that made people confess. Jason stumbled backward into the hallway, hands raised like David was ready to strike him, and Mom cried at David to stop abusing her son. Dad suggested David should stop this. David stayed still, staring at Jason like a good interrogator, wondering if he felt stealing $150,000 from his dying granny was an investment strategy. Despite the chilly environment, Jason's lips opened and closed without releasing anything, and I could see wetness on his forehead. Mom shoved and touched David's chest, telling him she wouldn't tolerate his violence and threats in her home. Keeping the bank statement in my hand, I watched everything like a movie from my chair. Aunt Rebecca wept into her hands by the fireplace, and I heard people chatting loudly. Some doubting Jason, some supporting him, some surprised. Jason was bodyguarded by my folks. His parents on either side form a human wall between him and the room. Uncle David backed off and observed Jason. All his jaw muscles worked. Jason looked at everyone to find an exit. Then he moved. Running for the front door, he pushed Mom into the coffee table. However, Uncle David was faster. He stopped Jason before he crossed the living room, possibly from police training. David crossed his arms in front of the door and refused to go until Jason explained where Grandma's money went. David again obstructed Jason's passage. Dad performed something I hadn't seen in 30 years. He pushed Uncle David away from the door with both hands on his chest and shouted to get out of Jason's path. David stood there gazing at my dad incredulous. I nearly expected a living room brawl. The room was silent save for Aunt Rebecca's crying. Nina explained why a check bounced in her low bank voice. She said she recorded every transfer after months of surveillance. Her calm voice was harsh. Jason sent money frequently, she stated. He shifted cash daily, sometimes 3 or 4 times when he lost. She had dates, times, and sums. Within 2 seconds, my mother turned from protector to assailant toward Nina. She shouted at Nina for violating banking privacy laws and damaging family confidence. She cautioned Nina that spying on Jason's finances may jeopardize her job. Nina stood with her arms at her sides and quietly stressed reporting elder financial abuse. Adds, when bank employees see suspicious patterns of an elderly person's money being drained by someone with power of attorney, they're actually required by law to document it and report suspected exploitation. She glanced at my mom and said she followed work standards. Uncle David contacted a detective who investigates elder financial crimes from his pocket phone. My dad tried to take David's phone, stating this was a family matter and we didn't need police. David lifted the phone like a toy, like kids wrestling. Dad grabbed his arm to lower it. Since they were chest to chest, red-faced and breathing hard, I expected fists. Aunt Rebecca jumped in and forced them apart with her hands on their chests and pleading. She wept more, mascara running, saying this wasn't helping. Jason kneeled in the living room, hands over his face and shoulders shaking. I presume his massive gulps were real, gambled while crying. He never meant things to get this bad, assumed he could handle it, and would repay Grandma when he got rich. He looked up at everyone with tears and snot on his cheeks and stated he was so close to winning a massive jackpot that would have mended everything. He needed another big win. My parents switched rapidly. Mom kneeled beside Jason and rocked him like a 5-year-old. It's okay, baby. You're sick. You need help, not judgment. We'll get you through this. Dad crouched and touched Jason's back. He stood and spoke to the room. He said Jason had realized he had a diagnosis, that gambling addiction is a mental disorder, and that we should treat him rather than blame him. He said real fans would assist Jason recover rather than attack him at his lowest point. I stood up with the bank statement. Some of my relatives nodded with my dad, some looked uncomfortable, and some cried. Anyone remember Grandma eating poor food in a cold house while Jason spent her life savings? So everyone could hear, I spoke slowly and clearly. Uncle David and Nina nodded, and one of my cousins remembered Grandma moaning about the cold last winter. However, my folks thought I said the cruelest thing. Mom looked horrified and said I didn't sympathize with Jason's mental illness. Dad said I tried to punish a sick person instead of assisting. Uncle David called and turned from my dad to the kitchen with the phone to his ear. He explained the situation in his police voice, all facts. Abuse of power of attorney, elder financial exploitation, $150,000 gambling site payments over 6 months. Some family member worked at the bank and recorded every transaction. My dad followed him to the kitchen doorway, saying that David was committing a terrible mistake that would ruin the family. Mom held Jason on the floor while he cried into her shoulder, and I stood with those bank documents wondering how we got to where exposing stolen evidence was cruel. I brought Mom's snacks, Megan remarked as she arrived with 2 supermarket bags. Her lips fell as she studied the entryway. Mom cuddled Jason on the floor while he wept on her shoulder. Dad crossed his arms next to them, ready to fight anyone around. Uncle David returned from the kitchen with his phone. In the corner chair, Aunt Rebecca wailed quietly. Nina kept more bank statements nearby. 3 relatives searched for hiding spots in the furnishings. Megan gently placed the grocery bags and asked why everyone was crying. Jason tried to speak but coughed and covered his face in Mom's shoulder. Dad told Megan to go since this was a family issue. Nina told Megan she needed something important. She displayed the bank paperwork and calmly explained that Jason had power of attorney for his grandma and moved $150,000 from her accounts to gambling sites over 6 months while she was dying. Megan's hands shook as she read the papers. Her face became white as she asked whether it was real. Nina nodded at her transfer dates and amounts. 3 hours after Jason's $45,000 deposit on January 10th, BetKing Casino followed. January 25th, $25,000. February 3rd, $35,000. Dated and timed transfers. Jason's dying grandma's money to gamble? Megan asked. Jason ultimately responded that it wasn't. He couldn't control his gambling disorder. Megan stopped him and asked how long he lied. Her voice raised as she explained she loaned him $4,500 last month for business. Was that gambling money? Jason didn't answer, so Mom remarked it wasn't the time to condemn him while he was hurting and needed support. Dad and Mom agreed that Jason's loved ones should focus on solutions and support, not blame and punishment. Mom glanced at Megan and said she would help Jason through this terrible disease if she cared. Uncle David came to the living room and said Detective Sarah Moore would interview and examine evidence. He said power of attorney prevented prosecution, but Grandma's terminal illness's gaming site transfers promoted elder financial exploitation. Dad was furious and pointed to the door, instructing David to go. David could not engage police in family affairs, he said. David stayed and said Grandma was his sister and he wouldn't allow Jason get away with her murder and life savings heist. Father tightened his hands approaching David. Aunt Rebecca emerged between them. Like a floor line, the living room split in half. Uncle David was at the kitchen door. Aunt Rebecca stood behind him. Nina approached with the bank statements. Megan crossed the room to join Nina after staring at Jason again. That side of the room was mine. My parents virtually bodyguarded Jason as we stood. Anxious relatives glanced at each other from their chairs, wondering where to stand or what to do. My Ohio cousin moved toward the door like she was fleeing. Mama hugged Jason and stared at us like we were attacking him. Dad stood with shoulders back and jaw set. He ignored everyone. All halted as the doorbell rang. Dad said no one answered the door. Uncle David assumed it was Detective Moore, so barring her entry wouldn't help Jason. Dad crossed his arms at the front door. The doorbell rang again. A woman said she was Detective Moore gathering financial exploitation statements. Yet Dad yelled through the door that she needed a warrant since this was private land. Detective Moore kindly advised she take statements at the police station, and that making things difficult wouldn't help his son. She investigated vulnerable adult exploitation and unusual transactions from an old woman's account. After a minute, Dad opened the door but blocked it. To be available for Jason chats, he invited her in. Detective Moore entered when asked. She had short brown hair, a belt badge and simple attire. She was about 40. She noticed crying people and a family separated as she looked around. Introduce herself and seek a document review location. Dad recommended she use the dining room table but stayed. Detective Moore agreed and entered the dining room. She grabbed her phone and notebook. She had Nina explain banking paperwork first. Nina sorted bank statements across from her. She described the January transfer schedule. Jason received $45,000 from Grandma on January 10th. The $45,000 got to BetKing Casino 3 hours later. Another $25,000 January 25th, $35,000 February 3rd, $20,000 February 18th. She listed all transaction dates and amounts. Detective Moore took photos of each document on her phone. Nina was asked about Grandma's transfers and medical visits. Ella made a calendar showing Jason sending money on Grandma's doctor and medicines days. Also, Detective Moore photographed the calendar. She asked Grandma's living circumstances. Ella said Grandma complained about being cold because Jason believed heating costs were too expensive. She ate generic food since Jason believed organic was too pricey. Since Jason considered new clothes too pricey, she wore the same ones for months. We send thousands to gaming sites regularly. Detective Moore asked Jason to explain several transfers from his grandmother's account to his and then to gambling sites. Jason rose up and dried his eyes, saying Grandma understood his financial strategy and agreed. He stated she recognized he was increasing her savings for her family after she died. Jason said he and Grandma made these trades verbally in private when Detective Moore asked whether he had written documentation. Claimed her trust completely and didn't need anything documented due of their closeness. Dad nodded as if understanding. Mom held Jason's shoulder. I couldn't remain quiet and said Grandma's neurology studies revealed early dementia in her final 6 months. Detective Moore requested for copies of those medical records, and I said the doctor could provide them. Uncle David said Jason requested power of attorney to protect Grandma from financial mistakes. He said Jason told the family Grandma was forgetful and needed help with payments and banking. Jason flushed and said it wasn't fair that Grandma wanted power of attorney since she was worried. Detective Moore took notes and asked Jason if he transferred $150,000 from his grandmother's accounts to online gambling sites between January and June. Jason noticed my dad take out his phone. Jason said he didn't feel comfortable answering questions without a counsel. My parents phoned their real estate closing lawyer friend to come over fast because Jason was interrogated without a lawyer. Detective Moore calmly indicated that Jason had the right to see a lawyer and that she supported his decision. Despite Jason's claims, she said the banking records and transaction history reveal financial abuse. Dad kept phoning the lawyer as Mom pleaded with Jason not to talk until they had representation. Detective Moore said she had enough notes and images to investigate. She gave me her card and advised me to contact her if I find Grandma's medical records or any relevant information. Uncle David brought her to the door and commended her promptness. After she left, my parents shouted at me and Uncle David for bringing police in a family quarrel and making Jason look guilty. Uncle David called and met with relatives who needed Grandma's money answers the following week. He asked each family member what Jason had told them about Grandma's medical care and expenditures. Jason told family members different stories about where the money went, and none of the figures matched. He told one family Grandma needed a $2,000 a month drug. He told another uncle Grandma's house needed a roof and foundation. He told a relative Grandma wanted to prepay her burial and buy a premium plot. Every story was different, and Jason's reported expenditures exceeded the $150,000 that disappeared. Aunt Rebecca documented Grandma's final 6 months' medical and housekeeping costs. Grandma's physicians, pharmacists, and service providers were called. Medical, prescription, home health aid, electricity, and grocery bills were sent to her. She checked every expenditure on a spreadsheet. Jason squandered away at least $125,000 unrelated to Grandma's care because everything cost like $25,000. Aunt Rebecca handed me the spreadsheet, and seeing how little Jason spent on Grandma compared to what he stole made me sick. Ella informed her bank manager of the unusual transaction patterns and requested authorization to speak publicly. The bank manager examined Ella's paperwork and said they should have seen the behavior sooner, but the power of attorney documentation appeared genuine, so the system didn't identify exploitation. He let Ella provide official statements and that the bank would cooperate with any investigation. Ella was glad she could now speak freely without privacy concerns. I met estate dispute and elder abuse civil attorney Mr. Thompson. His downtown office smelled like coffee and old books. Mr. Wood Thompson, 60, had gray hair and nose-pushed reading glasses. Bank statements, Ella's timeline, Aunt Rebecca's expense spreadsheet, and power of attorney were brought. Mr. Thompson studied everything for an hour, asking several questions about Jason's relationship with Grandma and the time frame. Jason's power of attorney gave him legal access to Grandma's cash, limiting criminal punishment, but civil action for breach of fiduciary duty was more likely. Gambling with power of attorney money violates that obligation. Rereading the material, Mr. Thompson decided, we had a strong case that Jason violated his fiduciary responsibility by using Grandma's money for personal benefit instead of her care. He explained civil litigation and recovery. He said legal fees could reach $6,500, and Jason may not recover anything if he has no assets. Add, even if we won the case and got a judgment, collecting money from someone who's broke and has gambling debts is extremely difficult. Mr. Thompson said it depends on whether we want justice and responsibility or money back. Even if you never collect, a court decision may be important. I suggested discussing cost sharing with Uncle David. After explaining the situation, Uncle David agreed to pay half the attorney fees because it wasn't about money. They wanted Jason to receive real consequences. We knew my parents wouldn't sue their golden child. Calling Mr. Thompson again, I said we would sue civilly. He needed a $6,500 retainer from each of us to start paperwork. My mom called crying that afternoon to ask me not to sue Jason. She said a lawsuit would destroy any chance of healing and moving forward as the family was already broken. Jason ruined the family by stealing from Grandma and letting her live in terrible conditions while gambling away her life savings. Mom said I was cruel and vindictive and would regret it when our relationship was too damaged. Dad emailed me and Uncle David saying suing Jason would be harassment and that they would contact their attorneys about countersuing. He stated they had documentation of their years of help and that we were insensitive by targeting their child. Email showed me family separation wasn't temporary or fixable. It persisted, worsened. David forwarded Dad's email to Mr. Thompson, questioned countersuit risk. Mr. Thompson said it was a mere threat to terrify us and that we may sue for fiduciary breach. He encouraged me to document parental interactions in case harassment escalated. I handed Mr. Thompson half the retainer, and Uncle David paid the next day. Jason hired criminal defense attorney Richard Crane 3 days after we paid the fee. Uncle David learnt via police contacts before my parents. Mr. Arrain soon informed Detective Moore that Jason's gambling addiction was a mental illness that hampers his judgment and decision-making. He said Jason's addiction prohibited criminal intent. Detective Moore told me this was a common financial exploitation method to reduce or avoid charges. She advised utilizing the pattern of lies and cover-ups to prove that Jason knew he was wrong, yet did anyway. Parents clung to this narrative. Within a week they convinced everyone Jason was ill and needed pity, not punishment. Mom commented on Facebook about assisting family members with addiction and understanding it as a medical condition, not a moral failure. Even without naming Jason, everyone knew her meaning. Many relatives who didn't know Grandma's money story appreciated her guts in standing up and supporting her son. Every time I saw a comment on my parents' warmth and understanding, I wanted to scream. I spent the weekend documenting Jason's deception and manipulation. Dad called the principal to apologize for high school cheating. His drunk driving accident was quieted and he acquired a new truck. The failing corporation lost $15,000 in retirement savings. When he stole Mom's wallet or Dad's tools. The never-used recording studio they built. I documented every double standard, explanation, and penalty I received for little mistakes while Jason got away with major ones. A 12-page document featured dates and events. I sent Uncle David, Nina, and Mr. Thompson copies. Nina described Jason's family gatherings over 5 years. She recalls him borrowing $4,500 from Aunt Rebecca for unrepaired cars. She'd seen him ask Uncle David's son for $500 for a failed business. She remembers Christmas 3 years ago when Jason borrowed $250 from our cousin Michelle for rent and never paid. Comparing notes, we realized Jason had been defrauding the family for years with different claims, promising to pay back but never doing so. Uncle David secretly questioned relatives about Jason. Detective-like, he asked comprehensive inquiries about Jason's financing and business agreements. He found amazing stuff, even to me. Jason borrowed $200 to $5,000 from 8 family members over 3 years. Nobody got $25,000 back. Each person gave Jason a different excuse for wanting money. Cash flow concerns, a rapid investment opportunity, medical bills for a health situation he never told our parents about, and car repairs after an accident. Every story was crafted to inspire urgency and sympathy without verification or follow-up. Uncle David's spreadsheet recorded dates, amounts, and Jason's stories. We told Detective Moore in her downtown office. Her desk contents were scrutinized for a long time without speaking. She glanced up and said this proved Jason's financial manipulating past, strengthening that case. She claimed Jason's attorney may say Grandma's event was a unique case of gambling addiction gone awry. The years-long practice showed intentional misrepresentation for personal gain. Jason could lie, weave great stories, and avoid detection. Addiction resistance decreased when the person committed planned scams while unwell. Detective Moore stated she was preparing a file that would make Jason's claims of incomprehension and incontrollability difficult. My parents found Uncle David's family interviews. I don't know who told them, but Dad's account emailed the extended family. I, Nina, and Uncle David were accused of witch-chasing Jason and ruining the family in the email, family unity and false accusations. Add. We were harassing vulnerable family members and manipulating them into making statements against Jason during his time of greatest need. It stated we were envious and bitter, and failed to grasp that addiction is a disease that needs treatment, not punishment. The memo ended by imploring everyone to remember family ties and resist money and misconceptions that might tear the family apart. In awe, I read it 3 times. They depicted themselves as victims and Jason as oppressible. Relatives wrote to support my parents and pray for family healing. Some quietly said they backed us and knew Jason's conduct. Family division increased daily. 3 weeks after the family meeting conflict, my mom sent another group email saying Jason had joined a 30-day gambling addiction treatment facility 2 hours away. She thought Jason was taking responsibility and getting therapy. The email advised Jason to stop suing while in treatment and focus on recovery. Family support is crucial for addiction rehabilitation, and punishment often leads to relapse. Emailing Mr. Thompson, I asked if Jason's treatment harmed our civil case. I was called within an hour to say therapy doesn't erase civil liability for fiduciary duty violation. He said Jason's lawyer may bring it up to evoke compassion, but it didn't change whether Jason owed restitution for the money he stole. Thompson said he was ready to suit and we shouldn't wait. Jason and my parents had several chances to apologize, yet they assaulted us. He sued for $210,000 in stolen funds, interest and legal fees the next week. Jason was accused of fiduciary misconduct, gambling site transfers, and financial harm to Grandma's estate and beneficiaries. 2 weeks later, Jason's attorney, Richard Crane, submitted a brief saying that Jason had no assets to recover and that the action would divert him from addiction therapy. The motion included financial evidence suggesting Jason had huge indebtedness. Relapse may come from the lawsuit's punitiveness and psychological trauma, it stated. The action requested dismissal or a delay until Jason recovered from therapy. Following event boiled my blood. My parents volunteered to pay Jason's legal defense. Due to frugalness, their parents couldn't help with my education debt. The same parents who recommended next year when I sought $750 for a professional certification. Their finances increased sufficiently to employ a criminal defense attorney to help Jason avoid prosecution for stealing $150,000 from Grandma. The extreme hypocrisy confused me. Mr. Thompson liked this since it showed my parents had resources they said they didn't. They protected Jason from punishment to express their support. We will respond to the motion and proceed regardless of their financial assistance for Jason's defense, he said. 2 weeks later, Mr. Thompson officially requested Jason's financials, career history, 3-year bank statements, and asset identification. Jason's attorney, Richard Crane, delivered boxes of unorganized paperwork to look through. For 3 evenings at Mr. Thompson's office, I highlighted Jason's bank statements and credit card bills, transfers and cash withdrawals. I noticed invoices for places Jason couldn't afford on his contact center wages, online gambling site purchases under multiple identities, and unpaid credit card cash advances. Mr. Thompson scheduled Jason's deposition for 6 weeks out and requested verification of his work, housing and family income from the past year. Megan's account transfer was detected. It showed on Grandma's bank statement 3 months before her death. Jason sent $35,000 to Megan's account with the note line, "Payment for business consulting services." I immediately phoned Megan to ask about Jason's contribution last year. She stopped before asking what I was talking about, so I explained the discovery documents. Megan said Jason ordered her to deposit company money in her account for tax purposes. Thinking it was company revenue, she spent $12,000 on auto repairs and Mom's medical bills. She cried on the phone when I informed her the money came from Grandma's accounts and swore she had no idea and would repay every penny. Mr. Thompson ruled Megan wasn't liable since she took the money in good faith without knowing its source, but her willingness to return it showed Jason lied about Grandma's money. Megan refunded the remaining $20,000 within 2 days and wrote about Jason's financial lies. Jason flooded my phone with texts 3 days after that conversation. First, he apologized and sought a second chance. The second message, 20 minutes later, said I was wrecking his life and delaying recovery. After 3 messages, if I really cared about family, I'd drop the lawsuit and give him space to heal. Over the next week, I got 30 SMS apologizing and blaming me for tearing the family apart. Jason claimed I was spiteful and callous, preferring money above my brother, and Mom sobbed every day because of me. He said I'd regret it when he relapsed, since the litigation was holding him back and my fault. Despite not answering, I screenshotted and backed up all texts 3 times. He said they revealed Jason's duplicity and lack of remorse for stealing from Grandma. He said manipulators move between apologies and blame, which would help in court. A week passed before the texts stopped. Mom phoned me Tuesday night and started crying before saying hello. She asked me to drop the lawsuit because seeing the family break up was hurting her. She said Jason learned his lesson and was getting therapy, so legal action was retribution, not justice. After 5 minutes of listening, I questioned her directly. I stated Jason stole $150,000 from her ill mother-in-law and wasted money while Grandma was poor. Does she think Jason should be punished or treated and move on? Mom was quiet before admitting Jason did wrong, but she said he was sick and punishing him wouldn't bring Grandma back or get the money. She said I prioritized money before family and would regret cutting these relationships later. I knew from that conversation that my mom would never punish Jason. Keeping in touch with my parents meant accepting their story of Jason as a sick victim rather than a robber who took from a dying woman. I asked Mom some time to think about our relationship. She wept harder, saying I abandoned the family like Jason. After the talk, I sat in my car for 20 minutes to process. Dad wrote me a formal email on family decisions and consequences, 2 days later. He stated suing Jason would mean leaving the family. The email described their aid with my first year of college before I got scholarships, the automobile they co-signed for me when I was 22, and my stays with them between locations. Dad said I returned their love and effort by beating my brother when he needed family support. I had 1 week to join this family or continue my bitterness and retribution. The email was forwarded without remark, and Mr. Thompson called me an hour later to say there was more confirmation of Jason's familial past that allowed his behavior for years. Uncle David called that weekend to say he'd talked to Aunt Rebecca and Nina. They wanted to start a support group for us dealing with Jason's theft and our parents' enabling. Our Thursday night gatherings shifted to Uncle David's. We started with just the four of us, laughing over our parents' ludicrous defenses of Jason and agreeing that we were right to expect consequences. After Nina brought her notes from years of watching Jason affect family members, we started noting patterns we'd all seen but never connected. Aunt Rebecca brought coffee while we reviewed my parents' guilt trips. Uncle David told stories of family members who ignored harmful behavior and underlined the significance of setting limits, even nasty ones. I barely survived those weeks of court and family stress with Thursday sessions. Jason's financial disclosure papers arrived 5 weeks after the lawsuit in a large manila package Mr. Thompson gave me in his office. Jason lacked assets. Only a 7-year-old car with a broken gearbox in my parents' driveway. No savings, retirement, or property. His debt to online gambling, personal loan companies and maxed-out credit cards was $60,000. He averaged 20 hours a week in a call center for minimum wage for 4 months. He lived with our parents for 6 months, unemployed and looking for work. Each debt, failed payment plan, and collection account was listed. Mr. Thompson spread the files on his desk and said winning the lawsuit wouldn't ensure compensation. If Jason had a real job, we might garnish his wages for years or decades, depending on state law. However, collecting from a negative net worth proved hard. He showed me that wage garnishment takes 10 to 15% of a paycheck after taxes and other deductions, while Jason's part-time minimum wage position only made $30 to $40 a month. This pace would take over 400 years to recover $150,000. Mr. Thompson said we may seek the judgment since it would legally show Jason's behavior and damage his credit and finances. But I accepted that money recovery would take time. After seeing Jason's financial statement in that office, I had to decide if prolonged litigation was worth it. The idea was to keep Jason accountable and get the family some of Grandma's money. Why pay extra for legal fees if there's no recovery? Read disclosure data to Uncle David from my car in the parking lot. He said it wasn't about money after a pause. The goal was to hold Jason accountable for his conduct rather than provide sympathy. Nina told me that evening that if we dropped the lawsuit, Jason would learn he could do bad things without consequences. The next Thursday, we sat around Uncle David's kitchen table with coffee and financial disclosure forms to explore our options. Uncle David said he'd seen too many cases as a cop when family members let things slide because punishment looked too harsh or expensive, and the offender kept doing worse things because they knew they'd get away with it. Nina remarked that we'd paid the retainer and filed the lawsuit, so withdrawing now would imply Jason won by being poor and sad. I agreed. This was about teaching that family activities had consequences, not money recovery. 2 days later, Mom called to tell me her therapist had a breakthrough. Her voice sounded weary and less defensive, like tears. She said she was starting to realize how her prejudice for Jason had damaged both of her boys over the years, how she'd held me to impossible standards while letting Jason get away with anything because she was afraid of losing his love. She apologized for her hypocrisy, for making me pay for the garage door while giving Jason a new truck after drunk driving, and for ignoring my successes while acknowledging Jason's failures as learning opportunities. She remembered moments from our childhood and adolescence that I'd mentioned thousands of times, but she'd always ignored. I'd never heard her apologize so honestly, like she noticed the pattern rather than explaining herself. She cried as she described how she'd accepted Jason's conduct for so long, producing the person who could steal from his dying granny and needed to take responsibility. She hoped that since she accepted everything, I would drop the lawsuit and let the family proceed. She understood why I was angry and unhappy and acknowledged that she'd caused a lot of that suffering, but she advised suing Jason would make things worse and delay recovery. She wanted us to focus on family again, assist Jason's rehabilitation, and create a healthy, respectful and loving relationship between her boys. Her earnest apologies sounded like she was confessing past wrongs but not current consequences. She admitted she'd been incorrect for years but wanted me to shelter Jason from his mistakes, which exacerbated this problem. I complimented Mom for realizing the bias and unequal standards, stating it meant more. I wanted long-term behavior change, not just words and promises over the phone. I said abandoning the lawsuit now would continue Jason's lifelong protection from consequences. She sobbed harder and stated I was cruel and unforgiving because I was retaliating for her attempts to make things right. I remained calm and highlighted that behavior change mattered, not conditional apologies. She said she couldn't fix things without my opportunity. I persuaded her that letting the case proceed would benefit everyone. After the call ended without a conclusion, I felt exhausted and dejected, but secure in my choice. Jason completed his 30-day gambling treatment program at a clinic my parents paid for 6 weeks after the meeting. They invited the entire extended family to a lunch to celebrate and encourage him for managing his recovery. Mom sent restaurant and time information to the group, congratulating Jason on quitting his addiction. Mom asked me to attend the dinner 2 days prior, saying Jason would feel encouraged by his brother. I didn't reply to group text. I told her I wouldn't celebrate Jason finishing basic therapy he should have done years ago as he was only in treatment for stealing $150,000. She said Jason was improving and deserved praise, whereas I was selfish and holding grudges instead of helping family. Dad texted me that I was failing them again and choosing anger above family unity after I said no thanks and hung up. I missed the legal complaint mediation a week after Jason's celebration lunch. Mr. Thompson called me the morning of mediation to say Jason's attorney wanted to settle rather than go to trial. Mr. Thompson, Jason's attorney, and I mediated over a long table in a downtown law office conference room. Jason wasn't present at mediation, which his attorney said was typical because parties made bargaining difficult. A simple settlement was suggested. Jason signed paperwork admitting stealing Grandma's money. He agreed to deposit $150 per month for 10 years into Grandma's heirs account. He would also agree to gambling addiction therapy with evidence every 3 months. If he missed payments or quit, the rest would be due immediately. His counsel said this was a reasonable conclusion that admitted guilt and considered Jason's ability to pay. He stressed that the study would cost more and yield poorer results. We went to a smaller conference room down the hall because Mr. Thompson wanted to think about the offer quietly. He showed me his calculator math. $150 per month for 10 years is $18,000. Or 12% of Jason's grandma theft. He said this was better than wage garnishment given Jason's job situation for financial recovery. Jason's legal admission of misconduct was the settlement's true value, which would follow him forever. Even though the financial recovery was small, Mr. Thompson advised accepting the settlement because it established penalties and legal accountability. He also noted that going to trial would cost $6,500 with no guarantee of a better outcome and that courts favored defendants who confessed guilt and presented fair payment plans. I called Uncle David from the conference room and read him the settlement conditions, including the acknowledgement of culpability and compensation. He put me on speaker so Nina could hear, and we argued whether Jason was getting off easy for taking such a small payment. Nina found $18,000 insulting versus $150,000. We already knew Jason had nothing to steal, so Uncle David said this was more about admittance than money. After a long pause, Uncle David suggested we should accept it when I asked what they thought honestly. He stated that Jason's formal admission of violating fiduciary responsibility would be on his permanent record, damage his ability to have power of attorney or manage others' funds, and prove he took from his dying grandma. That on record was better than litigating for years over money we'd never obtain, Nina agreed. We concluded this was about setting sanctions and documenting Jason's admission in a way that couldn't be contested or reduced, not full financial recovery, which was unachievable given his position. Mr. Thompson's office hosted the signing the next week. Jason, his attorney, and my parents looked like they were at a funeral, not their son confessing to stealing from his dying grandma. With only 6 people at the table, the conference room felt smaller. Mr. Thompson read the settlement documents to Jason. Jason Young, you acknowledge that you breached your power of attorney duty to Dorothy Young. You took $150,000 from her online gaming accounts between January and June. When Jason took the pen, his hand shook. He left and signed each document as his attorney instructed while my mom grabbed his shoulder. His admittance was now formal and unchangeable. Mr. Thompson collected the completed documents and made copies for everyone while Jason stared at the table and my parents looked at me like I'd ruined their son's life instead of just holding him responsibility for grandma's. My parents called 3 days after signing. Dad spoke largely as Mom cried. They sought to discuss payment terms since $150 a month would prevent Jason from recovering financially. Maybe we could cut it to $75 or let them pay. I reminded Dad that Jason had to pay and that third-party payments would void the deal. He hesitated and said I was too harsh while Jason was fighting his gambling addiction and repairing his life. I told him Jason spent $150,000 while grandma ate generic bread at home and that $18,000 over 10 years was simple. Mom answered the phone and wept because I placed money before family and that she didn't teach me to be that cold and rude. I hung up when she asked why I couldn't move on. I gave my parents explicit restrictions 2 months after the explosion. I'd attend Thanksgiving and Christmas with extended relatives. Smaller celebrations honoring Jason for grown-up tasks like working or not gambling wouldn't interest me. They constantly protected Jason and criticized me, so I never discussed the lawsuit or settlement with them. I specified the boundaries in an email to avoid interruptions and fights. Mom called within an hour and spent 20 minutes asking for flexibility. My rigid boundaries were another method of harming Jason and them, she continued. Families should forgive and move on. I emphasized that these were my terms for any connection and that I wasn't bargaining. She said I'd regret it later and hung up crying. Mom always challenged limits. She phoned every few days with a fresh reason to be kind. For Jason, having me for his birthday dinner would be special. He recovered well. Jason was promoted at work, so they celebrated. Can I visit for an hour? She texted photos of family events I missed and apologized. Dad accepted the boundaries but made passive-aggressive comments when we met. He stated 3 times throughout Thanksgiving how lovely it was to be together without tension. When I helped clean up after Christmas dinner, Dad said family loyalty and forgiveness used too important. 2 times I ignored the bait and exited the chat. Later, Uncle David and Aunt Rebecca became my closest relatives. We started Tuesday night dinners at their house and they called on weekends. Over the week, Rebecca emailed me funny memes and articles. David invited me to treks and baseball games my parents wouldn't attend. They limited Jason topics with my parents and refused to participate when Mom or Dad complained about my rigidity or tried to reason with me. Rebecca claimed her mother called her crying one night to tell her families should stay together. Rebecca cautioned Mom that sticking together doesn't mean avoiding consequences, and that Grandma may still have her finances if they'd held Jason accountable years ago. Her mother also hung up. Other cousins who supported accountability at the family reunion continued in touch with me, and we formed an unofficial coalition of people who refused to pretend everything was fine. Nina and I bonded over everything. We had supper once a month at a Thai restaurant midway between our flats and spoke about family and our constraints. She told me she was upset with Jason getting away with everything as a child because nobody cared. I told her about years of double standards and feeling like nothing I did was good enough. My parents had misled us for decades into thinking we were the problem. It was crucial that Nina introduced me to Chris, a construction worker, before telling my parents. She wanted trustworthy people to meet him before my parents made assumptions and difficulties. Chris was gracious to her when we took him to Thai. A month later, Nina informed my parents about Chris, and Mom asked when they were engaged and whether she had planned her wedding style. Nina abruptly told Mom to ease down after 8 weeks of dating. I started seeing a therapist 3 months after the incident to work through my complex family issues. I was enraged, heartbroken, and perplexed why my parents chose Jason above honesty and accountability. A therapist helped me recognize I was grieving Grandma and the concept of having parents who would do what's right above comfortable. She stated I kept hoping they'd wake up and realize they'd failed both their boys by supporting Jason and setting unrealistic expectations. We accepted my parents as they are, not as I wanted. She advised me to love them and accept our imperfect connection. Having someone affirm my beliefs and that setting limits is healthy and necessary helped. Mr. Thompson confirmed Jason's first payment on time. $150 settlement tracking account deposit. The second payment arrived on time 30 days later. I didn't know if Jason was treating his gambling addiction or meeting settlement requirements. Mr. Thompson said the treatment program verification papers come quarterly and the first one showed Jason attending group sessions twice a week. But I agreed it wasn't my role to monitor his recovery or care whether he was changing. Even if the consequences were modest, I owed it to myself and Grandma to punish Jason. Jason's theft and Grandma's money loss weren't the worst. It lamented parents who chose justice above comfort. I lived to satisfy them by being responsible, successful, and perfect. Jason was nurtured and safeguarded throughout his life despite his transgressions. They kept defending him when the pattern should have been obvious. That realization hurt more than stolen money since I couldn't change how others saw us. I was learning to accept them as parents rather than demand perfection. Saturday morning, a week after Jason's second payment, Uncle David invited me to coffee. While sitting on his back porch, he told me Grandma would be proud of how I stood up for what was right when it was hard and lonely. He said Grandma battled with family members who used her benevolence. Her sister always borrowed without repaying. She co-signed her brother's defaulting loan. She was the family doormat for decades because she thought politeness and forgiveness made her good. At her death, Grandma told David she wished she had confronted abusers earlier. She most admired those who did the right thing despite pain. Despite breaking the family, David grabbed my shoulder and said I had the backbone Grandma wished she'd had sooner and that she'd be glad someone finally held Jason accountable. 4 months after the fight, Uncle David, Aunt Rebecca, Nina, and other righteous relatives celebrated Thanksgiving with me. We ordered pizza instead of turkey because nobody wanted to spend hours in the kitchen pretending everything was normal. Nina introduced her new boyfriend calmly after months. Uncle David's grandma stories made us laugh, not cry. We played board games without discussing Jason, my parents, or the settlement. It was strange to celebrate a holiday without the whole family, but it was liberating to not hide problems. Instead of fixing something, we agreed to meet monthly for supper or coffee to build something new. A Christmas group text from my parents asked me to reconsider spending the holidays with them. I promised to visit for an hour on Christmas afternoon but not for dinner. It's amazing they respected those boundaries. Mom texted separately that she understood my treatment and need for space. Dad didn't speak but stopped passive-aggressively mentioning family devotion. Settlement account alerts show Jason made his 4th payment on time. I wasn't sure if he quit gambling or just hit it. Mr. I preserved Thompson's monthly deposit confirmation emails without emotion. The whole scenario proved family justice isn't cinematic justice. Nobody was jailed. Jason didn't regret. My parents didn't realize their mistake for decades. I received $150 a month, relatives who cared about doing the right thing, and the knowledge that I stood up for Grandma even if it cost me my image of ordinary parents. I was receiving nothing else, so it was plenty.